New year, new season, and new topics. Welcome to Season 2 of Weather with Blake and Heather.
This is the show to learn about all things weather. We're going to be covering everything about winter weather and the polar vortex that hit the Midwest just this past week, along with an interesting story about the Milky Way.
Plus, we'll have the full rundown of Northwest Indiana's snowy weekend. We'll have that and more right after this. Welcome back to this week's episode. The polar vortex was in full swing all last week throughout the Midwest and even the southern United States. Many people were affected by these bone-chilling temperatures, including Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana. Schools closed down, businesses shut down, and many people refused to leave the comfort of their own homes. For those in Minnesota, they saw on Wednesday, January 30th, they were told to lower their thermostats to 65 degrees to limit the use of natural gas because they would go into a shortage. We will have that and more right after the break.
As for the railroads in Chicago, they took an interesting approach to the below 50 wind chills and the temperatures near -30. They decided to set the tracks of Chicago's Metro commuter rail system ablaze on Tuesday in order to maintain their tracks. One of two things will happen when the temperatures get too cold, one of which will be that the rails will actually split apart from each other due to the shrinking metal, or the second is that the tracks get too clogged with snow and ice, so they have to set it on fire to melt off the snow and ice. Now, some of the railroad ties can get damaged by this method of fixing the tracks, but it's a lot easier than having the entire line damaged by the sub-zero temperatures. When the public asked Metro if this was safe to do, they responded with saying it's safe to run the trains over the flames because the diesel fuel in the trains, quote, combusts only with pressure and heat, not open flames. It was a pretty interesting sight to see these tracks on fire, although no one was in danger.
Well, pretty incredible sight to see, of course. Now, over 50% of the lakes were frozen as of February 1st, and it left an amazing pattern on satellite. Not only that, but there was a ship that cut through the middle of the ice, starting near northern Chicago. You can see the exact path that the ship took by the line directly through, cutting through the ice itself. In addition to that, the National Weather Service Milwaukee showed images of the ice cover on Great Lakes that shifted northward due to the more mild south winds. According to NOAA, about 56% of the lakes were covered on ice that Friday, compared to the lakes being only covered 24% earlier that week. With the blast of cold air earlier that week, it caused many of the lakes to rapidly grow ice cover and has left Lake Erie at 92% of the total lake covered. Even though the week seems warmer, there's another cold blast on its way.
That's right. The cold weather really affected those mostly around Lake Michigan, the Great Lakes, and surrounding areas. For those in Chicago that had to tough out about -50-degree wind chills, including here in Valpo, many businesses opted to shut down for at least Wednesday and some into that Thursday. The National Weather Service in Chicago warned the public that all people should stay inside during the dangerously cold weather, and if they had to go outside, to cover up all extremities because frostbite could set in within minutes of direct contact with wind chills at near 40 degrees below. And Valparaiso University decided to call off school that Wednesday, and other surrounding schools followed suit with canceling school for the safety of the students, teachers, and faculty. We'll cover more of the record-breaking temperatures coming up later in the episode.
With all this talk about the polar vortex that battered the Midwest, it's important that we cover the questions and comments about global warming. Many people were asking why it's so cold when there's supposedly global warming happening around us. Well, the answer to this is more complicated than one may think. It's not just easy to categorize all weather under the same umbrella, and assuming that our day-to-day weather has a huge effect on the climatological trends. Weather is used to refer only to our day-to-day temperatures, precipitation, or anything surrounding about how you feel when you walk outside. Now, climate, that's the average temperature over a given amount of time, which is at least 20 years or more. Many people who are skeptical over the global warming phenomenon often point to the cold snap days as the days that prove that we aren't actually warming. It's not the individual location that experiences warming as a whole, it's the whole globe over a longer period of time. As we experiencing this Arctic blast over the United States and the Midwest. Australia was also reaching record heat waves at the same time. But regardless, if you are a believer, global warming and the studies around it will constantly be talked about when referring to weather.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like you mentioned, social media especially likes to light up about the difference between climate and temperatures, and people don't quite understand that climate is such a large picture that even a cold blast like this has some effect to some extent, but in the grand scheme of things, very little impact on the overall climatological trends.
Yeah, and we experience this cold winter weather quite often here in Indiana. I think people really forget that we actually do experience those days that are in the negatives anyway,
Yep.
but then they're like, well, we're not actually warming at all because it's cold today.
Right. Well, speaking of that cold, Chicago and right here in Northwest Indiana seem to get some of the worst of this cold weather. And it's not so much that we saw the coldest temperatures, it's just that the areas farther north, Minnesota, Iowa, they're more used to seeing those colder temperatures than we are here in the city.
Yeah, of course. I even saw temperatures in Minnesota and Minneapolis. They were almost negative 60 degrees wind chill, which is bone chilling for me to even grasp because negative 40 is like cold enough for me.
Yeah, well, and the thing is that the National Weather Service in Des Moines actually recommended to people to not take deep breaths or talk while you're outside because your lungs could freeze so quickly. And what helped us get so cold here is that the wind, as the core of the polar vortex came down, the wind came out of the west, so we weren't protected by the lake as we normally are with these cold blasts.
Yeah, I experienced walking outside when it was around negative 50, and I immediately started coughing, and I was outside for I was only outside for 2 minutes and I started coughing, so I can see why the Iowa people were warned to not even take deep breaths.
Well, and I took a brisk walk outside too to get over here. We launched a weather balloon here in the weather department, and you can feel in your throat, it dries up, and you feel, I found incredibly thirsty. It's just unbelievable that cold of weather can start doing crazy things like that.
Yeah, our meteorology department launched a weather balloon during this cold polar vortex, and they really saw that the temperature was really that cold, and it kind of just went viral over Weather Nation and all social media because we were crazy launching a weather balloon in that cold of temperatures.
6 o'clock in the morning, we were out there bright and early. So
yeah,
crazy
very
stuff.
Cool.
Well, we're gonna head to break, and when we come back, we're gonna cover what Punxsutawney Pete, the Groundhog, had to say about spring and more winter weather stories.
We'll also be talking about an interesting story about the Milky Way and its new way to utilize satellites. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back to this episode. With winter in the forefront of our minds, it's fitting to continue the conversation of winter weather. Now for us in the Midwest, we're just getting started winter weather-wise. The past week's Arctic blast killed at least 23 people across the United States. And the same areas that saw temperatures dip to negative 50 degrees or more are now back up to the upper 40 degrees, which is over a 90-degree temperature difference within just 2 days. This cold snap paired with the sudden warm-up is going to cause rapid snow and ice melt across the United States. Officials during the deep freeze urged all residents in the hardest hit cities, including Minneapolis and Chicago and Detroit, to stay inside to avoid frostbite.
Well, they even had some problems inside. Residents that were living in Minneapolis during the freeze were urged by Xcel, the natural gas company there, to turn their thermostats down to 65 degrees to avoid a natural gas shortage in the city. Many people took this advice because they knew that there was a definite reason behind the company telling residents to heed use of all things that require natural gas. Some people weren't happy with having to live in a cold house because it was already cold enough outside. By the middle of the day Wednesday and into Wednesday evenings, parts of Michigan were also given this advice as well. The state sent out an alert to all cell phones. During the cold snap, the price of gas did go up quite a bit due to the high demand for it. So much so that most gas pumps nearby in Minneapolis weren't able to even work properly during the freezing cold temperatures.
Now let's take a look at the record lows that happened during the polar vortex with the life-threatening temperatures approaching well below the negatives. The National Weather Service was on high alert for which temperatures would reach all-time lows in the Chicago area. Specifically, Chicago had sub-zero temperatures for more than 52 straight hours Thursday night. This sub-zero streak beat out the last record by 14 hours. National Weather Service estimates that this 2019 sub-zero temperature to be the fourth longest frozen streak ever. No all-time lows were broken for Chicago during this freeze. but the minus 23 degrees was close to the record set in January 20th, 1985 for minus 27. However, the daily records were broken according to NWS Chicago. The lowest maximum temperature broken was minus 10, which was previously 3 degrees in 2004. They also broke the lowest minimum temperature at 23 below zero, which was minus 15 in 1966. Thursday, the low also set a new record for lowest minimum temperature, which was minus 21, previously minus 12. Now, given the wind chills were extremely cold to be outside, there were greater wind chills previously. Now, if you thought 23 was cold, the all-time record is sitting at 82 below zero Christmas Eve in 1983. Chicago's wind chill only got to minus 52 degrees on Wednesday, which is not even closely compared to minus 82 below.
They're both still pretty horrible. Now getting into other cold records for the surrounding areas of Chicago, Rockford broke some all-time lows during the Polar Vortex. Rockford reached minus 31 degrees on Thursday, which broke their previous record, which was set on January 10th, 1982 at negative 27 degrees. Mount Carroll, Illinois also broke all-time records too. They reached a frigid temperature of 38 degrees below zero Thursday, which could set the next all-time record low for Illinois if approved by the committee. The previous record set in January 5th, 1999 at minus 36 degrees in Congerville. The temperatures were not the only thing that broke records for winter weather in Chicago, but snowfall also did. During the week of January 17th to January 29th, snow fell every single day, which totaled up to 14.7 inches in depth in the city. This has only happened 5 other times, according to the National Weather Service.
That's a little bit more snow than what we got here. Now, after this cold snap, Chicago will see a 100-degree difference from last Thursday, sitting at negative 50-degree wind chill, by Sunday reaching a high above 40 degrees. After all this talk of the records, here, let's take a look at the Michigan shoreline in Chicago 2 weeks ago Saturday as the waves battered the coast. The highest totals from this system were around 11 to 12 inches of snow, mainly near Illinois, Wisconsin state line. The heavy accumulations were for a deformation band that dropped heavy snow for several hours. But the snowstorm we saw began the weekend wasn't all the Mother Nature delivered. Lake effect snow rattled parts of northwest Indiana on Sunday the 20th. Now, Blake was able to shoot this footage of his travels on that day, which you see as he drives from Valparaiso to Merrillville, a trip about 15 miles westbound. You notice that the sunshine turns to snow, gradually intensifying until visibilities are down to a quarter of a mile. Now, it was brief but heavy and accumulated on the roads quickly. Then you could watch the sun come right back out again. We didn't see too much from the lake effect here in Valparaiso, but other areas weren't quite so lucky.
Yeah, well, and parts of Michigan and over into New York as well had a 1-2 punch because not only did they have the cold weather, which granted it wasn't as cold as what we saw here, because they were protected by the lake, but they saw lake effect snow ongoing almost all week. Some areas saw up to 1.5 feet of snow during that week. So
yeah, I saw the snow totals for us looked low compared to the East Coast. I saw up to 20 inches of snow.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
Well, and salt's ineffective at that temperature as well, so you had that snowpack on the roads and none of it could melt.
Yeah, which leads to very dangerous road conditions for people out on the road, trying to get to work, trying to get to school if they had to, and they shouldn't be out on the roads at all.
Right, and for that reason, we had temperatures here delayed the Postal Service Wednesday and Thursday from delivering in our area, up into Michigan as well, and over into Wisconsin and Minnesota. But not only that, a lot of schools closed, both here and all across the Midwest.
Yeah, I saw Michigan had a bunch of school closings. Valparaiso only saw 2 days of those days that were closed, but I know into Wisconsin and Michigan, it was almost that entire week that they didn't have class.
Grand Valley State University up in near Grand Rapids closed for the entire week last week, which is nearly unheard of. I'm sure Monday morning wasn't very fun for them trying to catch back up.
I bet that broke a record of some sort, right?
It probably did, yes, yeah. So when we're going to take a break, when we come back from commercial, we're going to show you what you need to know about how fast this winter is going to stick around and how satellite technology is improving us for the better.
Stick with us.
Welcome back. For those of you living in the Midwest and the surrounding areas, you probably feel like this winter won't end. However, many people put the fate of winter into a groundhog's hands and to see if he will see his shadow. Saturday marked Groundhog Day, and the most famous woodchuck, as I incorrectly said earlier, it's not Punxsutawney Pete, it's Punxsutawney Phil. He's calling for an early spring. Legend has it, if Phil sees a shadow, that's an omen of 6 more weeks of bad weather, and he'll crawl back into his hole. But if it's cloudy, he'll stay out, signifying the end of bitter temperatures. He's been at it for 130 years, but Phil doesn't have the best track record. The brown furball is only right about 40% of the time, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Even so, the Groundhog Day is a fun tradition that inspired the 1993 film of the same name. If you really want to know about the weather, you'd be better off replacing it with Coin Flip Day.
You know, the groundhog isn't as accurate as one may think. You know, even though Groundhog says that it will be spring, will be coming a little earlier, winter weather is still here to stay for most of us, at least 6 more weeks. So let's take a look at the story from southern Indiana, where a man decided to make a snow sculpture with all the snow left behind for those in Greenfield, Indiana. They didn't just make a snowman, but instead a 7-foot-tall icy giant. Now it's a statue of a giant bald eagle made entirely out of snow. Rick Horton made it in his front yard the weekend of mid-January. He said the snow was perfect for sculpting because it was wet and it was easy to pack. Horton, who has been making sculptures for years, said his inspiration came from his love of flying.
This year I decided to make an eagle because Greenfield has 2 eagles, and I love flying. I fly RC planes, and eagles soar. And so I figured that would be perfect for this year.
Now, Rick Horton building a snowman would just have been another snowman. Now, on the side of the road, however, an eagle seemed to fit his passions more.
Quite interesting. Did you happen to catch the rare super blood wolf moon on Sunday, January 20th? While it was cloudy here in Valparaiso, many people across the world had a great view of this rare event. Take a look at this. A super blood wolf moon means a total lunar eclipse happened at the same time as a supermoon. Here's how it works. As the full moon comes into the Earth's shadow, it darkens, and the sunlight that passes through the atmosphere of the Earth makes the moon appear red. Weather conditions play a factor. For some, the moon appeared blood red, brick-colored, or rusty. The U.S. won't see another total lunar eclipse until 2022. The super rare sight, it was one worth staying up for.
You know, even though Punxsutawney Phil thinks that winter will only be around for another 6 weeks. Now, Blake, what does winter have in store for us in the coming days?
Well, Heather, we are still seeing some of those winter-like temperatures, not as bad as last week. We're 35 in Valparaiso, 32 in Michigan City, 30 at O'Hare. Looking regionally, we're sitting somewhere around the same, 30 in Grand Rapids, 28 in Rockford, but we do have a very messy system coming up that's going to continue that winter trend for us. Here it is on radar. You'll see, looks like we just got clipped with perhaps a bit of freezing rain mix, but it's really starting to fill in over on the north side of Chicago and even off to the southwest. This is a pretty potent system. A lot of freezing rain. Wherever you see those pink shades, that's where roads are expected to become icy all the way up here through the overnight hours into tomorrow. So as we take a look at travel right now, it doesn't look too bad on the roads. It is a little wet. You'll see as we travel down I-94 here through Porter and Lake counties. Roads for the most part just wet, not seeing a lot of those icy conditions right now and not a lot of major accidents. We'll see how that plays out tonight. We do have some winter weather alerts to tell you about here. The color is actually missing here. They're under an ice storm warning in parts of Chicago through 6 a.m. tomorrow. It's a winter weather advisory for us and off to our neighbors to the north. It's not going to last long here, only from 6 p.m. tonight through midnight on Wednesday. So it's going to transition to rain fairly quickly. As we head through Futurecast, notice it switches over to rain rather quickly, but we could begin to clear out coming Wednesday afternoon, at least briefly. We'll hang on to some of the cloud cover before another system begins to work its way in Wednesday evening into Thursday. This one looks to stay all rain, so we shouldn't have too many problems with the roads there. And as we head through the day on Thursday into Thursday morning, it starts to become a little cloudy before yet some more rain could work its way through Thursday afternoon. So a very wet period in store, but not a lot of snow expected. But if you do encounter that freezing rain tonight or any time, especially in the Chicagoland area, it's important to remember your winter driving tips. The first one, check your tires, ensure they're inflated before heading out, especially check the tread on them as well if it's time to replace them, and the best time to do that is before a storm hits. Also want to check your emergency supplies, make sure you keep them stocked in your car. Food, water, and blankets can all be kept in the trunk. Even a shovel if the snow is expected to be heavy enough. Kitty litter is also a great method if you're looking to get traction on your tires if you get stuck. And you also got to watch out for other cars. Cold temps will cause slick roads and slide-offs, so be sure you're watching out for that. Even this freezing rain is really nasty because you can't always see the ice on the roadways, and that's really when we see a lot of issues here in Northwest Indiana.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to see that the snow is still in the forecast for just a little bit. Now, it's cold right here, and we're going to see some pretty snow falling across the Midwest. We might not see another polar vortex this season by any means, but winter is still sticking around for us.
Yes, that is right. And so we have some lake effect snow that'll be coming more so into Michigan, but we could still get clipped by that later this week.
Yeah.
And the good news is that the lake has frozen up so much in the past few weeks that we won't have to deal with that as much as had we had this cold air in the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I did notice, though, it has, in fact, melted quite a bit from when we were talking about most of Lake Michigan being frozen over. Like, almost more 20% of that has melted since we last talked about it.
Yeah, what a wild swing there in the range. And now that some of that's melted, if the cold air does come back over the lakes, especially if we get that north wind here in Northwest Indiana, that can really set up for some nice lake effect.
Yeah, we definitely can. And when we saw those cold temperatures last week, we definitely saw the huge ramification of us right around the lake area, Chicago, Valparaiso specifically, but it went all the way down to the south and even into the St. Louis area.
Yeah, they dealt with a lot of snow the past few weeks. St. Louis has really had it rough, same with here. And it's just so surprising because we started out the winter so quiet.
Yeah.
And that was kind of misleading for a lot of folks. But the second half of winter is really coming strong and trying to catch up ground on the lack of winter we saw in the first half.
Yeah, I mean, we did see a little bit of snow November, which was a little tease, and everyone's like, wow, we probably won't have a crazy winter, but that polar vortex came and took us all by surprise.
Yes.
And we really weren't necessarily ready for it, nor did we want to see those cold temperatures either.
Yeah, well, the university had to end up canceling the second half of Thursday. We were supposed to open up at noon, but some of the buildings weren't getting heat. We had some problems with pipes burst in the dorms, and there's not a ton you can do to prepare for weather that cold other than just stay inside and hope everything works out all right.
Yeah, I mean, we're in Uptown, so they suggested that we even keep our pipes running water through them just in case that they burst and freeze. We don't want to be without water.
Yeah, well, fortunately, there weren't too many issues here. And we've warmed back up significantly between the feel-like temperature of -50 on Wednesday morning to 50 degrees just a few days ago. That's a 100-degree feel-like swing in less than a
Yeah,
week.
it's hard to feel comfortable once we went from -40, -50 to 50 degrees.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy for our temperatures around here.
Yes. And so we're going to take a break. But when we come back, you won't want to miss a story about the Milky Way exploding and what you need to know about satellites.
You won't want to miss this.
Thanks for sticking around. There is now more to talk about with the Milky Way cosmos crashing into another galaxy, Andromeda. This galaxy is a close neighbor to the Milky Way galaxy and has been anticipated for some time. Now that this may occur, but not for a long time. The study predicts that the Milky Way will collide with a large Magellanic Cloud just 1 billion to 4 billion years from now. The original theory discussed was that this would be possibly approximately 6 to 8 billion years away. The fun fact about Andromeda is that you can even see this with the naked eye when looking up into space. According to Marius Kutin, astrophysicist at Durham University Institute for Computational Cosmology, he explained that this galaxy has revealed that it has more mass than they originally anticipated. Cauchin and his researchers made many simulations on their models, and they saw that this collision between galaxies occurred over 93% of the time. This collision, although it sounds incredible and possibly fast, would occur over the course of billions of years. They described the stars from Andromeda ricocheting like pinballs around the galaxy, which would in turn cause the Milky Way stars to be launched from their original orbits, sending them right outside of the Milky Way. Now, what's going to happen to the black hole in the middle of the Milky Way, Heather?
Well, the dark hole of the Milky Way has been quiet for a long time for us here on Earth. However, when this collision happens, it will only act as fuel for this fire. As galaxies crash, the chaos causes cosmic gas to be released into the dark holes. Now, the dark holes feed on this cosmic gas and wake up the cosmic gas swirls down in the black holes at an incredible speed, which sends bursts of high energy around the black hole and then releases these bursts of radiation outside the black hole. Calton explained the eruption of radiation would lead to our black hole growing 10 times in size. Now, would the effect of this collision have on Earth if it survives? Well, the stars might disappear from the galaxy and Earth might be shifted from its original orbit. However, the human form surviving on planet Earth may only notice this when they get completely thrown out of the galaxy where no one can possibly survive. Now, Calton explains this collision is inevitable, but nothing we should be really scared about in the short term.
Well, get this, Earth's magnetic field is acting up and geologists are trying to understand why. It looks like for some reason, Earth's north magnetic pole is moving away from Canada and into Siberia. Now, scientists have developed a model called the World Magnetic Model, which was originally made in 2015 and is supposed to be updated every 5 years. However, due to this new shift in Earth's magnetism, they made an update just a couple weeks ago. This magnetic model helps us and scientists understand the planet's magnetic field as well as all modern navigation like Google Maps. Now, the liquid at Earth's core is the driving force at which allows Earth to have this magnetic field to begin with. In 2018, researchers noticed that this error in the model was so large that it had a real effect on navigation. Scientists are still trying to understand why this shift happened to begin with. However, it doesn't seem like there is a concrete answer just yet.
Now switching gears from space and onto satellites, new satellite imagery can now indicate precipitation over the sea. For researchers to better understand the environment, it's important so that they can better understand the precipitation processes over water as well as land. However, it was hard to do both until now. NOAA and other researchers discovered this by using signals from the Global Navigation Satellite System. It detects rain. The technology that they use through the GNSS system is called reflectrometry. GNSS is considered to be all-weather navigation system, however, only used to detect weather over land along with other disturbance. However, this uses a new method that can now account for the rough sea surfaces and now can detect rain over the sea surfaces. Because the sea surfaces are constantly changing due to winds, the researchers discovered that when precipitation falls on the rough sea surface, it changes its roughness. The strength of the satellite signals reflected by the surface is inversely proportional to their roughness, so the stronger the waves are, the weaker the signal is. Also, the researchers found that they could measure the wind speeds over the oceans from the measurements on the surface roughness. Overall, this study has provided a lot of insight to the world of forecasting that will help forecasters and researchers better understand the environment and more every day.
Pretty fascinating to look at it because satellites play more of a role in meteorology than a lot of people think in terms of cloud cover and detecting the rain over the ocean where we don't have any radars.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have enough radar technology to even get to those systems. So it's really great to see that there is a new technology that can better understand the processes over the sea, because we still need to know what's going out on there to understand the processes that affect us every day here.
Right, and some of these stories about, the black hole and everything like that is really fascinating because, obviously it's far beyond our lifetimes, but it's still interesting to see what might happen to our whole Milky Way system here in a long time away in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the study that it could possibly just blow up and throw us out of the whole orbit. However, we're never going to be here to even see that.
Thankfully. Very happy about that.
Thankfully. It's really important for us to see these discoveries and research this whole topic, especially with the satellites, so we can better have researchers and studies to help us forecast and give that information to National Weather Service and broadcast meteorology so we can do a better job on our end.
Right. It's all one giant puzzle. We're just trying to put one piece in at a time.
Yes, of course.
When we come back, we'll have a few closing words. Stick with us. Welcome back. We wanted to thank you for watching this episode of Weather with Blake and Heather and for sticking around with us for another season.
If you want to see that and more, be sure to follow our Facebook page, VUTV Weather, our Twitter, and also our Instagram, VUTV. Our VUTV Weather Facebook page has helpful forecasts for you for what you should expect for the greater living Valparaiso area. And be sure to share what exciting weather events that you see from your home with us. Now, if you want to be more connected with us, follow our shows and stories on YouTube. We will have all VUTV content on our YouTube and website at valpovutv.org for you to rewatch every single week.
And Heather and I thank you for sticking with us for yet another season talking about all things weather. Our next show will be even talking about more current events and new winter weather highlights. We hope you enjoyed all the footage from just about everything, space weather to winter weather to our record-breaking cold.
Now be sure to watch our next episode of Weather with Blake and Heather in just another short week. You won't want to miss it. We'll see you next time.